So after sort of Dez is lost, we kind of have this moment where everyone sort of senses this on the ship, or Orla and Comac at least sort of sense this and convey that to the crew. And they all kind of reconvene on the ship a bit to sort of process the loss of Dez. And that's where you get, Josh mentioned like Comac is like angry that like this, he was so young, he's had so much of his life and just gone for a dumb reason. Which is definitely reflective of the fact that he's been coming back into this, the where the Starlight Beacon is sort of in close proximity to where these flashbacks have been occurring, that he's kind of reliving this on his journey towards the Starlight Beacon. Wreath is kind of at a loss that he sort of wasn't able to save him and wants to sort of go back and, find some evidence of Dez's body, kind of is still holding out hope that maybe, he wasn't torched alive, and the fact that they didn't find anything could maybe serve as the fact that he wasn't sort of disintegrated. He gets down there and finds that Nan is also sort of poking around and investigating. And they basically follow where the doors were at to past sort of where Dez was supposedly disintegrated and find a tunnel that ends with an airlock, and basically conclude that this was a way to launch ships out, and that if Dez wasn't actually disintegrated, he likely was just launched out into space and died that way. So either way, they at this point, Dez either got disintegrated or, was propelled onto space. And they make a comment that if he had like air in his lungs, it would have expanded and he would have died instantly. And if he had somehow, pushed his breath out, he would have survived for a couple minutes, at most. But either way is either lost space or been disintegrated.
Yeah, I took a mental note at that section. I was like, if I ever get ejected out of the spaceship, make sure you breathe out before you do it.
Yeah.
I did feel a little like that description counteracted what happened to Leia in Last Jedi, which bugged me just a little bit. But beyond that, I thought it was interesting. Like it was not what happened to her, what they described there.
I think there's a part in there, because I was thinking the same thing. And then there's a paragraph, I forget where it is, but it describes if you were knocked out and not really or had been, there's something, the way they describe it that I think basically covers what happened to Leia. And that they're you're the Force, you have a few people that are strong with the Force, can survive longer. And I think they reference someone that's able to last for 6 minutes or something like that or something. So there is something that I read it and I was like, I feel like this is kind of this is covering the bases for how Leia was able to survive after they just told you if you have air in your lungs, you'll explode upon impact with open space. After sort of they've made this discovery and kind of just confirm that Dez is gone for good, they return to the ship and they basically learn from Leox that he's picked up some information and been some communications that the hyperspace is now reopened in a limited capacity. They're not going to be going to the Starlight Beacon, but they are able to return to Coruscant at this point. Which then leads us to another sort of brief flashback in the 25 years earlier, where Orla, Comac, and Master Larrett are fighting not only the giant snake that attacked him at the end of the sort of previous section of this, but there's a bunch of snakes within this cavern. And this is another moment where Orlak's master has died and he's sad, but he also is realizing in the immediate aftermath of his master dying, how much he's let him down by sort of not following his lead and understanding the lore, because it wasn't just one snake in this, tunnel that they're having to fight through a good amount of snakes before they're able to sort of get to some safety. We also get a little more insight from the captured sort of dignitaries as they're forced to spend time with each other while they're being held captive. And they come to sort of discuss the fact that they don't even realize why their people are feuding. That's kind of just become tradition that they hate each other and don't talk to each other. And that, had anyone at any point sort of opened a line of communication between the two, they would have realized some of their similarities and that they didn't really know why they had sort of this angst against each other. And that sort of this would have probably, you know, opened the doors to the Republic sooner, and that they wouldn't be sitting here in this position where they, you know, were able to be kidnapped.
And the snake sequence seemed pretty terrifying. Just really thinking it through sounded
yeah, just scary. The scale of them kind of reminds me of like the snake from like Chamber of Secrets, like these sort of large scale things. They say they're white with like multiple fangs. And then, yeah, they also describe that it's not really just the one that attacks them at the end of the previous chapter. They have to go through like multiple ones. And like that.
I wondered if it was
a point where they're each taking like on like one individually and stuff. So.
Yeah, I wondered if it was the thing we see in Rise of Skywalker at all. Like that's what I was imagining in my mind. I don't know if they actually gave it a name to cross-check, because I do think they were just calling it snakes, but that's what it was in my head when they were running through the tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seemed like huge. Like the way they describe it was massive. I think the first one they kill, they say that like the three of them each basically took a side of its head with their lightsabers. Like that's how large it was, that their lightsabers encompassed its head. Exiting the sort of this flashback and moving back into the current timeline, all the crews are sort of preparing to leave the ship if they can, or leave the space station if they can. The Jedi that are sort of left alive at this point, which is Reath, Orla, and Comac, sort of come together and build this sort of force bubble around the statues to sort of contain the darkness so that they can transport it and move it onto the vessel to head back to Coruscant. Most of the other ships at this time are also leaving or have already left. The only one that's sort of lagging behind is Nan and Haig's ramshackle ship. Still needs some repairs to be done on it. So they're sort of the one that's lingering as they depart. The hyperspace journey, for the most part, is a little rough. They describe it because like hyperspace is still somewhat sick, but it's safe for the most part. Out of sort of, it implies that they're all getting a lot of like motion sickness because it's kind of not as smooth as it should be, given the pieces of the legacy run still within it. And along this, we have a few different sort of pieces that happen. Reath, Orla, I think, tells Reath to write a report for Jorah O'Malley, his master. And he basically describes, you know, all the stuff he's gone through on this journey, and that should be enough of the frontier for him, and that he doesn't, you know, want to continue with the frontier. Cav expresses his disdain for, you know, leaving Coruscant again. But after he types this up, kind of deletes this message and never submits it for his master to read. And then along the way, they also get a distress call for a ship that's like on fire. I think it seems like it's been damaged by some pieces of the Great Disaster. We get this sort of lengthy action sequence where they kind of all go in different ways to save everyone on board, from Comac helping everyone to sort of be able to gain access to some cut-off escape pods, to Reath being able to find a Wookiee child in the fires and help them escape.
Yeah, it was a cool sequence to see them, you know, be heroic and do all this more actiony stuff, but in the grand scheme of things, it seemed like it kind of was an unnecessary detraction from the main storyline. It didn't really add much beyond just showing the Jedi being heroic, which is really what we already got on the Amaxian station anyway.
Yeah, it was basically there's a cat in the tree like type of thing they did there, but I mean, it was cute that they had this little baby Wookiee.
Yeah. I thought it was a little odd in that it seemed like it was maybe going to set up some stuff, and that like Comac ended up being on an escape pod, you know, at the end of it, like he left via an escape pod. So they were kind of split up a little bit. But that really was more just like to show that they all got away safely. It wasn't that they, you know, ended up split up after this. It was definitely like a side quest in the video game that was definitely optional. That it felt a little out of place. It had some fun action moments, but definitely didn't seem like it played into the rest of the story. And especially since it's not really addressed afterwards, we just sort of get them approaching Coruscant immediately after. As they're approaching Coruscant on their final leg of their journey, Leox and Affy are able to access some Republic logs of sort of ships coming and going, and they're impressed. Just one that like the Republic gives this public information that there's all this stuff trackable, where they're used to sort of the Outer Rim having none of this information. And they basically find all the Bind Guild ships that have come and gone or docked on Coruscant. And one has a pretty unique call sign that Leox points out, basically indicates that the head of the Bind Guild is on board, which would imply that Scover Bind is likely alive and is now docked on Coruscant. So as they sort of land on Coruscant, we kind of have them all split into a few different arcs. We have Reeth goes on his own, Affy goes to find Scover, and then Orla and Comac are dealing with the statues. So starting with sort of Reeth's time on Coruscant, this is where he learns that his master, Joramali, was killed by the Nile, fighting the Nile. And in his sort of grief goes and crosses the Kyber Arc alone, and becomes even more sort of confused by what she was intending him to learn from it. Now that she's gone and he can never really get the answers to a lot of the questions she had left him with. Given his interaction with sort of what happened at the station, he's invited by the Jedi Council to some meetings to sort of discuss and analyze what had gone on. During this, they bring up some pictures of some Nile ship and kind of question whether maybe they were involved, at which point Reeth recognizes the Nile ship they're showing as Nan and Haig's, and that Nan and Haig actually are potentially members of the Nile, which triggers Reeth to be able to want to go back to the station and sort of confront them, knowing that they were still fixing their ship there. He thinks that they might have just been employed for them to be able to hang around and loot the ship or find, whatever was going on with the ship. Or the station rather, and he thinks that they might still be there, but he's told that there's really no current safe way that they can sort of send a Jedi mission back to that station right now. And then he's also asked to come back to the Jedi Council again later, and when he does this, he's sort of asked to consider where he wants his Padawan path to continue and where his training should go, and that they're kind of leaving that in his hands to decide how he wants to continue, and that will sort of inform who his his next master would be.
So I'd assume that we're certainly after the final battle with Kasav's storm from Light of the Jedi, which I thought was interesting placement, because that's towards the back half, certainly towards the near end of Light of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of gut punch for us to be with Reeth during that revelation, even though we knew it was coming. I frankly didn't expect that it would come so soon in the book, that he'd have that loss too, particularly with Des seemingly dying a short time before this. And then also I was pretty shocked by the revelation of Nan and Haig being Nile. I kind of fully bought into her just being kind of this very curious, young girl who maybe had a crush on Reeth and wanted to know about the Jedi, but learning that it was, just some sly intelligence gathering was pretty cool twist, and also really gave her like some teeth as a character. You're like, oh wow, she was way more conniving than Reeth in that situation. And the last thing I'll say about this section is that another kind of difference in how we see the Jedi during this era versus maybe like the prequel era, in terms of them letting Reeth kind of have control over his path, which again kind of flies in the face of what we typically would see from the Jedi in the prequel.
Yeah, imagine if this council would have been the council for Anakin. I mean, it would have changed that whole storyline.
Yeah.
But I felt the same, Josh. Like, I felt like the Jorah news, it surprised me. Not that she was dead, obviously, because we knew, but I didn't think we'd get that till close to the end of the book, or I thought he'd at least meet back up with her at some point. So that was rough. But the Nan thing got me like the most. Like, I felt truly manipulated by Nan. I mean, I don't think we really mentioned it enough, probably, but she was ultra flirtatious with Reeth. I mean, like, to the point that like Reeth was like a few times questioning like the boundaries of what he was allowed to do and whether he was also flirting with her. And in hindsight, like, man, she was playing him. She was a spy. I mean, it was much more brutal. I do think also, because I saw this like trend over the weekend, I guess, from people reading the book, but related to this topic, there's like a conversation near the beginning of the book with Affy. I think it was with Affy, about whether the Jedi could have sex. That like never has been explicitly stated in Star Wars. And he totally implied that they could, as long as they weren't attached. And that Jorah in particular was known for like doing what she felt like she wanted to in this case.
Yeah.
Which I think all of that was, again, giving more like gray area to the rules than what we see during you know, the prequel era, when maybe that conversation could have changed again what Anakin chose to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you get not only Wreath sort of having this internal like battle of like, oh, am I like coming on too strong, or like am I being more than just like friendly and informative, but you have like the other characters of like Orla and Comac like commenting on too, that like, you know, they refer to it as, yeah, like, you know, the flirtation council or something is occurring over there and things like that. And then especially when you have this, that like part of it too is that Wreath was trying to make like a conceited effort to like spread the like kindness of the Jedi and be like, you know, the ambassador to the frontier that Jorah wanted him to do, that he really did not want to. So then he's really conflicted in this, and he's like, I was trying to do the right thing and this totally backfired. And so like, I really want to go back and confront her on sort of, you know, what she was secretly doing.
Yep.
Yeah. It also makes the Nihil much scarier to me, that like they're not mindless raiders or Vikings like kind of style. Like if they have the ability to be this manipulative without weapons as well, like it's a much better foe, I think, than I felt like they were from like the Jedi even.
And
yeah,
I
it
think
goes back to our point I think we made when we were talking about Later the Jedi. It's the Nile is really a collection of all different species and people from all different walks of life across the galaxy. So it even scarier, like it could be anyone.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that we get the impression that they're yet just people of different species, different areas of the galaxy, but you get the sense in Light of the Jedi that they're all just kind of like warriors who have like banded together. Whereas here you have someone that's clearly much younger than kind of what I was perceiving from Light of the Jedi, and then with Haig, someone much older than I was perceiving from Light of the Jedi. You have someone that's like super elderly that is, you know, like using a cane and stuff, and then Dan, who's, you know, clearly much younger. So it definitely expands sort of the capabilities and sort of, you know, window of who could be within the Nile.
Well, we do end Test of Courage with the Nile going to recruit child soldiers. So
yep,
it's true.
It's true.
The thing you just said, Josh, about the various species, like gives me Skrull vibes a little bit that I didn't think about before. But that is a really cool thing they could play with more. That if they could literally be anyone, so like they could have infiltrated the Republic potentially, and we don't know yet because of who they are.
Well, we know that they have moles, right? Because I forget what the senator's name was in Light of the Jedi, the senator from, I think, Serrano, Dooku's planet, but his like chief
assistant,
of staff
right,
was the mole, right? Yeah. But yeah, that is terrifying. They could be anywhere, and you know, who knows how deep the infiltration runs.
Jumping back into the story, so we've now left with Wreath is basically wanting to go back to the Maxine station, but not being sort of allowed to, or not being given the sort of tools to by the Jedi Council, and kind of left to decide how his own future should be shaped on his own. Then moving to Affy, she goes sort of immediately to search for her mother, Scoverbine, and finds her on the dock ship that her and Leox had identified as potentially the one that she'd been on. They have some time on Coruscant and kind of spend it together to catch up a bit. And during this time, Affy makes a bunch of attempts to address sort of what she'd found on the Maxine station. and eventually, gets it out from her adopted mother that she's sort of aware of what goes on there, and that she shouldn't really worry about it, that the pilots sort of are left to their own devices when they're making transports, and if they're using the station, like that's up to them, and it's not really a big deal. And Affy isn't really convinced by that, and feels there's more to the story. So when Scover is off at a meeting, she accesses her data pad, and basically discovers that the Bind Guild uses indentured servants, and then going further that her parents were indentured, and based on their records, her parents had died on the Amaxine station. And so she confronts Leox about this, and Leox knew about this, but also assumed that she had known about that, given that she was like the surrogate daughter of the leader of the guild, and sort of suggests that basically that there were bounties and other rewards that if you could make deliveries in a faster time, or and under budget, that would reduce time off your sort of indentured servitude. And that he starts to suggest that the Amaxine station, even though it clearly is dangerous, was probably then being used as a shortcut to make deliveries faster, and that's what these messages were. These were like tips for people there of ways that they could get through space a little quicker to sort of help each other reduce the time to serve left on their indenture to Scover Bind.
Yeah, this was another gut punch of a moment, just because throughout the whole book up until this point, Affy is very much about making Scover proud and doing right by her adopted mother, and looking forward to eventually being the one who takes over the guild. So to have her have this revelation that Scover not only has these indentures, which they make a point of saying it's not as bad as slavery, which the Republic has outlawed at this point, but still pretty bad, especially the way Scover's kind of forcing these people into taking unnecessary risks, but also finding out that Affy's parents were in that indentured camp, and ultimately as a result died due to these unnecessary risks. It really shifted the narrative in a very sad but also very interesting way.
Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just gonna say that one of the interesting parts about it too is that up until this point, Affy's kind of been like, "Hey, I want to show this to Scover to reveal something that other people are doing wrong, and that there's some wrongdoing," and slowly is having to come to this realization of this is all Scover is 100% complicit in all of the things she's discovered, that she seems as, if not illegal, at least shady, or somehow being kept under wraps, and hidden in some regard. And especially like you mentioned that they say having indentured servants isn't illegal, but you're not sort of meant to encourage them to reduce their time by putting them in harm's way. Whereas the Bind Guild's definitely having these rewards of if you can shave time off your deliveries, or come in under budget on what it costs with fuel costs and things like that, gets compensated in time off your servitude. And clearly it seems that that's the way that Affy's parents had died on the Maxine station, trying to utilize maybe the boosters or something like that.
Yep.
We then move to the final group of our main cast on Coruscant, which is Orla and Comac. And they've basically been brought to an area within the Jedi Temple that they are bringing the statues in. And it's basically an underground area, this hidden place that's underneath the Jedi Temple in Coruscant. And we learn, I learned there because I didn't recall this from Tarkin, but I guess they addressed this in Tarkin, that the Jedi Temple was built upon a Sith shrine. And so this is really this powerful sort of place where the dark and light side sort of combine together. And together they get together some of the most powerful Jedi they're around to basically remove the shield around these statues and essentially release the darkness within so they could take it down collectively. They take the shield down and realize that there's no darkness there. And they basically come to the conclusion that, they made an error in that these statues did not have some sort of dark force contained within them, but rather were containing it on the ship, and they've now probably left the ship with some dark force unleashed, and which leads them to want to also go back to the Amaxine station to sort of investigate things. They are told that by the Jedi that, it's not safe and that they can't sort of approve this mission. But Comac interprets this as they didn't say we couldn't go. They just like won't pay for it, type of a thing. I'm not going to be able to expense these receipts. And basically go and they collect Wreath, and then they, go back to the vessel where Affy wants to go back now that she's learned that her parents died there, and sort of reinvestigate that. And basically reunites this original group that was on the vessel to make a journey back to the Amaxine station to seal the darkness and then investigate the station a little bit more.
Yeah, this whole sequence with Orla and Comac was really cool to me. And like, I think this sort of Jedi exorcism thing that they were trying to perform on the statues was pretty cool, that they were trying to, prepare to unleash and then lock out the darkness, is a neat direction for it. In Dooku, Jedi Lost, like they mentioned quite a bit that Dooku and Sifo Dyas as children are like trying to infiltrate the rooms where they keep these artifacts. And I'm not sure now. I need to like go back and look whether or not they mentioned that was on a Sith temple or not, but you got the sense that they do have quite a bit of artifacts there, and it actually messes with Sifo Dyas pretty traumatically. So like this process like helped to like, I feel like, give more to that maybe they sort of are going around like Indiana Jones archaeologists trying to find these artifacts and put them away. And they make a point of saying that like Wreath, I think, just immediately assumed these were Sith, and Comac kind of says, well, we have no idea of knowing whether these are Sith or not. There are many things that predate all of us, and darkness is darkness, sort of. So it could be from something else, which is maybe the first little bit of foreshadowing of what that could be.
Yeah, I also like the reveal, I guess not so much the reveal, but carrying on what we learned in Tarkin about the Jedi Temple being built on this Sith shrine or temple. Really cool connection back to kind of Yoda, choosing Dagobah as his planet to exile on due to the strong dark side force there in the tree, and kind of this idea of counterbalancing dark and light. Also felt very much like more horror movie tropes, from like, oh no, we thought we got rid of the evil, but we actually blew it and made it a lot worse. So I thought it was pretty cool, cool reveal. And also all three of these storylines on Coruscant, I think they nicely kind of tied that up in terms of giving everyone a reason to want to go back to the Amaxine station in a way that didn't feel too forced.
Yeah. I thought that one, it was really interesting in that I think like Light of the Jedi, we really didn't get much mention outside of, I think they like referenced that there were some Sith Wars in the past. And then A Test of Courage, we get a little bit more of like a discussion of like, with the lightsaber whip, like that it's used by Night Sisters and maybe used by like dark stuff. That this is really the first time where you get a lot of more acknowledgement that like there is this rich history of the Sith and the dark side within the High Republic, and they're at time of peace, but we're learning more and more of like, where the Sith are sort of, or have existed in this time period versus the stuff we're familiar with. And I did like, that you kind of had this, we got to go back moment where they kind of all sort of realize that they have unfinished business there, especially because just in terms of like how far we are through the book at this point, I was surprised that they were like leaving the station and going back to Coruscant. So when they kind of set up all these threads that then lead them back to the station, it was pretty fun to have that moment.
Yep.
But before they return to the Amaxine station, we do get another flashback sequence. Here we have Orla, Comac, and Master Lorette have killed the snakes and sort of aren't coming across anymore, but it does give them a bit of downtime as they're searching for a way to find the hostages. And this is where we talked that we get a little bit more of Comac sort of struggling to resist mourning his master, and that you get he senses that Orla is, as the other Jedi sort of are meant to not encourage them from having these emotions, but he can sense that Orla's immediately sort of sympathetic to what he's feeling. And then we get a brief conversation between the two dignitaries that are being held, Cassell and Thandeka, that sort of expands that they're like kind of becoming friends almost in this situation that they're in, and that they really have more in common than they thought. But this leads us back to the journey back to Amaxine. As they're heading back, Orla is sort of on the vessel and exploring a bit, and comes across the secret cargo of the vessel that Leox and Affy had sort of been hoping no one would find earlier, and they find that's a supply of spice. But it's okay because Leox insists that it is medicinal. So you have this really funny moment where I assumed, they assume they have something dangerous or some secret thing, but it's really just they have drugs that Leox has basically been sampling throughout this time too. He always has like a spice stick in his mouth whenever they're doing something.
A CBD shop soon.
Yeah. They also reference the two that like, oh, in some places it's legal, in other places not. So it's kind of a gray area. So don't worry about it. But as they sort of make their way back to the Amaxine station and drop out of hyperspace, they immediately spot a Nile storm. And this, I don't know that they really talked about it in Light of the Jedi in the same way they talk about here, but the sort of fleets of the Nile the ships can kind of have hodgepodge ways to dock with each other, so they can become like one giant ship and then kind of break apart into little ones. And so they basically see a storm, which is kind of a larger ship comprised of other ones. And they see it as sort of they're approaching the Amaxine station, and they kind of do a maneuver to hook onto an asteroid to hide behind it. And then sort of when they get a chance, they kind of slingshot themselves towards the Amaxine station in the opposing orbit around it to use the station to keep themselves hidden from it. At this point, Orla, Comac, Reeth, and Affy get on some spacesuits and basically jump from their ship to the other, to the Amaxine station airlocks to get back on board. And here we have another moment where you have kind of the characters coming across each other's paths a little bit, for the most part, kind of having their own storylines similar to Coruscant for the first chunk back on Amaxine station. Reeth, knowing that Nan and Haig are Nile, remembers that Nan was also looking around where Des had killed, and at the time thought it was more innocent, but realizes now maybe she was snooping around for something. And so basically goes back to the lower levels to maybe investigate that if she's either there or find what she was maybe looking for. I guess it's worth mentioning that their ship is still docked there, so they know that Nan and Haig are likely on board. As he goes down there, he gets trapped in the same room that Des sort of had been trapped in, and is kind of like, oh no, like this is it for me. But basically realizes he's gone into a transport pod, and instead of being disintegrated, is launched out of the station into hyperspace. He's in hyperspace for not that long, but it basically eventually lands on this marshy green planet, and immediately kind of senses a dark force there, sort of amongst the jungle. And he calls for it to come out and realizes that the jungle and these plants are alive, and starts sort of coming towards him and speaking to him. And they basically introduce themselves as the Drengir, and they're sort of an ancient species. And he realizes that the Amaxine station has this ability to launch these transport pods around the world, or around the galaxy rather, and that they had sort of taken over from the Amaxines, from an ancient time ago, and basically intended to use that to launch the Drengir around and conquer planets themselves.
This is where I think the book went from pretty good to really good to me.
Yeah.
Like the Drengir stuff is totally unique and different from anything we've had in Star Wars. I honestly wish I didn't know the Drengir existed prior to reading the book, though. That would be my only complaint, is like I wish they'd have kept that a secret, because I think it would have been a pretty startling reveal when these plants start talking. I mean, I
Mhm.
still wasn't expecting them to talk, frankly, either. I thought maybe it'd be like a force connection or something, but the book really describes this darkness on the whole
Mhm.
thing, that like just dread and fear and like almost like your darkest visions and stuff are like possessing any person in it. And like he's in sort of like a drugged state that he's like unclear if maybe there's toxins or something
Mhm.
from the plants, but it seems to just be actually just the weight of this ancient species.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree, Dan. I was unclear of how they would handle the Drengir when they announced that they would be one of the kind of primary villains in the High Republic series. I kind of like you thought they'd have like this hive mind that they'd be able to, communicate. But when we're introduced to them here, when Reith lands on this planet, they are fully sentient. They speak. They can talk to Reith, and they're just frankly very like menacing. Like they keep
Mhm.
referencing that they're doing this very kind of creepy laughing all together,
Mhm.
and they're consistently referring to Reith as meat and as
Mhm.
food, and it seems like
Meat.
that's their sole kind of purpose is just to feed off of other living things, and whatever gets in the way, they'll destroy.
And I thought it was cool though that they're definitely plants still,
Mhm.
like that they are not a meat-based creature in some way, for lack of a better term. They're for sure plants. And Reith kind of a little bit goes into like his own mode like Comac did earlier, where
Mhm.
he's like, oh, I need to kind of like think this through and study this. And then he's like, oh, I'm actually in danger. Let
Yep.
me refocus again.
Yeah, they immediately kind of talk amongst each other as well as talking to him in like an interesting way. And yeah, he is really like kind of hanging on the words and them explaining sort of who that he is to them and that. And they also, as they're talking about him, they're mentioning that like, oh, he's like the other one,
Mm.
which basically leads Reith to realize that this is where Dez might have been similar in a transport ship and been launched to here, and kind of starts to sense him, and basically demands that they bring him out. And we basically get a flashback from Dez where he was landed here and kind of was captured by the Drengir immediately and tortured and poisoned, and they've kind of broken his mind. And when they bring him out, they basically are like, "We'll let you go if you kill this other person that's now here." And he's kind of blinded by this poisoned and sort of mind melt that they put on him. So he doesn't know that he's attacking Reith, but he is pretty dazed and weakened. So Reith is sort of able to overcome him and kind of break his mind free and say like, "Hey, this is me. We got to get out of here." And they basically flee that planet by jumping back in the transport pod they came in and like activating it to just do a return trip. Um, but as they're doing that, the Drengir then hop in the one that Dez had came in and basically know that the Maxine station's back up and running and kind of follow behind them, to return. Uh, Once they're there, they're kind of like stumbling out of that thing, and Reith's trying to get Dez, make sure he's okay, and get them away from that, and realizes that the Drengir are sort of going to be coming in the transport pod behind them. So as soon as they arrive, he does this clever stuff where basically force pushes their pod away from the doors, which forces them to like come out of their pod and then come to the doors that basically puts them in the path of the energy boosters that they thought had disintegrated Dez early on. And this time actually does disintegrate the Drengir that have sort of chased him back from that planet to the Maxine station.
Yeah, it was great how this kind of sequence played out. First of all, uh, really glad they brought back Dez and kind of reintroduced him to the story, and that he didn't just die in a
Yeah.
freak accident. I also thought it was interesting to get more background on the Amaxian, and it sounds like they had in fact kind of built the station to use as a waypoint to basically go very quickly through this technology to develop to other worlds. And primarily were trying to fight the Drengir, and ultimately it sounds like, according to Drengir, that they lost that battle and that the Drengir were able to kind of defeat the Amaxian and take over the station. But yeah, I mean, what an introduction to the Drengir, and as we will soon cover, we now know that they are occupying the station too, and now no longer have the idols to hold them back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're much scarier than I feel like it sounds like when we're talking about this out loud too, that their ability to like control Dez like that and like puppet him, I think has a lot of implications for the future of the High Republic. Maybe they're puppeting the Nihil at some point, or taking it to another level where they can do what they want with their mind control capabilities. Kind of reminded me of I'm blanking on the creature's name from Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Oh,
like getting into
Bo Gullet.
Yeah, Bo Gullet.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think you do have that full circle of Reith figuring out that he thinks Dez was killed by this, boosters early on, and then knowing that he can use that same concept of like, well, I actually could kill someone with this. Once the Drengir are chasing them, and even you have this moment of Reith again having to sort of act in defense to sort of take a life to save a life, where he feels guilty but kind of senses that like what I did was right this time, and is a little more confident in the actions he had to take. While this is gone, Affy is back sort of looking for more evidence to find sort of maybe what happened to her parents and what's going on with the Bind Guild. And is in the upper levels where the Nihil are sort of moving through. And she's the first to spot Nan is still around, but has very much sort of changed her appearance, and that she's changed her clothes. You can see all of her arms that are covered in tattoos. She had some the blue 3 sort of stripes in her hair before that they hadn't really noticed, but now it makes sense because she's now added onto her face and sort of is in full Nihil mode. And then she sort of gets a message from Leox, who basically tells her that the Nihil ship is moving into position and probably knows that someone's on board, as they're sort of going to try and board the Amaxian station. At the same time, this is probably likely caused because Comac and Orla are attempting to sort of seal in the darkness back with the statues. And at this point, they sense the Drengir, who show themselves to Orla and Comac. And we learned that they were sort of imprisoned by these statues long ago, but they were done by people like them, but with red lightsabers. So we learned that the Sith actually imprisoned the Drengir here. And then the Drengir attack. We have this fun sequence with Orla and Comac fighting them off, and sort of being overwhelmed a bit by them, and then realizing that the AT droids protect the plant life, that the Drengir are not a part of the plant life, that there are the rest of it's overgrown. And they basically pin the Drengir under some vines, which forces the Drengir to sort of tear through those vines to escape, and sets off this sort of army of droids to come and try and take down the Drengir. And they say that the droids are getting wiped out, but it does give Comac and Orla enough time to sort of make a break back to the statues and can finish sort of what they started with the Force, and actually complete their seal and lock the Drengir back away once again.
How scary are these if the Sith decided to imprison them? Was the first question that came in my mind at that point. Like, I thought that was really cool. I mean, I was assuming it was the Jedi who imprisoned them, or something else, not the Sith.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a really cool addition with the red lightsaber comment.
Yeah. And it's another one where we haven't really seen much like Sith reference outside. We know like the Sith Wars happened. Like, so now we know that, like, especially that since the station's been used, like how long ago was this and things like that. Like, some of the timing around that's interesting as well.